All right, welcome in, welcome in. Glad to have everybody joining us. Greg, glad to have you. Colin, glad to have you as well. Welcome to another episode of Immigration Legal Tech Conversations presented by Visa Law AI for immigration intelligence you can trust. During Immigration Legal Tech Conversations, we explore the evolving landscape of legal technology and dissect innovative applications thereof. Today we're joined, I'm excited to introduce Colin Levy. Colin is an author, educator, and general counsel focused on legal technology and AI. He's the author of the Legal Tech Ecosystem and a professor at Albany Law School. Colin, you're a leading voice in the evolution of legal practice, and you've been helping legal professionals modernize through technology. And you are one of the most prolific LinkedIn posters that I've seen outside of Greg Siskind. How are you doing today? What between all the things that you're doing, writing, working at Malbec and teaching at Albany Law School, I imagine you've got some speaking engagements as well. What's keeping you the most busy these days?
I think what's keeping me the most busy is just constantly learning about the next model, the next tool, and frankly, continuing to help cut through the noise and the hype that exists because it's just endless. And everything these days is AI powered this, AI powered that. And every time I see one of those phrases, I'm thinking to myself, what exactly is AI powering really? Not like plugging in and all of a sudden, whoop, it's on. I've had many a conversation with many different marketing folks, including my own marketing team, about that phrase. It doesn't look like it's going to be going away anytime soon. But that being said, yes, I am definitely busy staying on top of just all the developments that are going on, and as I am apt to do, helping people just kind of understand to some degree what I think they should be paying attention to and what they should not be paying attention to.
And that's full-time work, to just keep up with all the updates and all the new things. And so, one of the things that I wanted to sort of start today with is just hear a little bit about, you know, you published your book, The Legal Tech Ecosystem, in 2022. We're now in 2026, and things have changed rapidly. Um, you know, if you could rewrite the book at this point in time, how much of it is going to change? How much of it is actually going to stay the same? And, we think about, this sort of timeline and how rapidly AI has changed from, 2022 to 2026, certainly. But how other, legal technologies, maybe even outside of AI, have changed as well. And if, feel like things have developed to a point where, you phase things out or you phase things in, do you think that you would have written this book in the same way? Do you think that a lot of the messages still hold true even today?
I would argue that actually, in a kind of interesting way, that largely a lot of what the book focuses on has remained true because it is not wasn't a book that was really even about AI, even though was just coming out at the time when the book came out. It's largely focused on things AI still can't really solve: change management, people, culture, um, adaptation, adoption of tech, adopting things that will last, that sort of thing. So, if anything, what I would do today, if I were rewriting it, I would probably have a little bit more AI infused into it. But again, the book really was never intended to be a sort of a how-to tech book. It was more intended as all right, so you want to learn about legal tech. Well, it's really an ecosystem of people, process, and tools together. And so I purposely designed the book and wrote it in a way to illustrate that point in different ways. So thankfully, it hasn't become that outdated. Of course, I did write a little bit about AI at the end of the book, and that has definitely changed since then. But really, it hasn't. So I'm thankful about that. But anytime I'm writing anything, I'm well aware of the fact that some of it could become irrelevant, some of it may not be. It's perfectly fine. My goal is not to create stuff that is always going to remain relevant. It's more a matter of helping people understand things as they're developing, and so that's kind of the goal.
Well, that's why you do a new edition also from time to time on it. it gives you an excuse to go back and look at a lot of the topics that you did before. When I was looking at the book, I mean, I felt like a lot of the subjects that you were discussing in there, I think will be, I mean, AI is purporting to try and, address a lot of those things like e-discovery and data management and contract management and all that. But I think sort of, the principles that are, in terms of evaluating the technology and how they can use it, it's I guess the question I have is in terms of there seems like lawyers are having to choose or being asked to think if they are even in that particular product category about legacy products versus sort of these new startups in the AI space that are purporting to do to make it easier to do functions that have been done for years by products that have, started 10, 20, 30 years ago. And I guess one question I have for you is in terms of the way you think about the subject you're talking about is, should lawyers be looking at the legacy products and seeing if they're keeping up with AI? Should they be looking at some of these new tools that are basically AI native that are coming out now? I mean, how are you advising folks to think about sort of those evergreen technology, subjects like legal research or case management or practice management, and whether they should stick with the products that have been around for years and years versus, starting to think about maybe for this particular category or that one, it might be time to just start from scratch with something that's completely new and made for AI.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I don't think there's a easy, straightforward kind of this is definitely what you should do every single time answer to it. I think it's more a matter of looking at, okay, well, if you're looking at tools, what's driving you to look at tools? What is the impetus? What is the problem? And having that very well defined in your head and perhaps also written out will help then sort of help you give some sense to what type of tools you should be looking at. Because I think the tendency, of course, for many is to start looking at whatever the latest and greatest exists out there, the newest, the most powerful, the most tech forward. But that should be secondary to to the problem. In other words, you can't solve a problem with a tool that isn't designed to solve that problem. And you're not going to know if you have a tool designed to solve that problem if you don't know what the problem is. So
what are you hiring it to do?
Right. So you need to kind of have, because you don't want to be off searching for a solution in search of a problem. I've seen that happen many a time. And when it's happening is you end up getting a tool. You might use it sometimes, you might not. But the bottom line is it leaves you dissatisfied and likely dissuades you from further adoption of other tools because you just spent all this time and you're not happy with the result. When honestly, the problem to begin with was likely you not doing enough due diligence first to figure out what it is you're trying to solve for. That's a theme I also return back to in the book. That being said, certainly there are a lot of tools and tools that also have existed have now changed as a result of AI. So certainly the capabilities have changed. But what hasn't changed is, again, the need to identify the problem. Because oftentimes the problem may not even be one that technology can solve, frankly. It could be a process problem. It could be a cultural problem. Tech's not going to make a culture better or worse or what have you. It's people that are going to make a culture better or worse. Likewise, with a process, you put tech and layer it on top of a process. If the process is bad, the tech in all likelihood is going to make that process look 10 times worse. So, you kind of have to do the not so glamorous work of figuring out what it is you're trying to solve for first, and then start doing kind of the more fun pieces of evaluating tools. And then when you're evaluating tools, you want to make sure you have the people actually that will be using those tools be a part of that evaluation process and not just the person holding, the money to be the person evaluating. Because if that happens, the person evaluating that has money may be looking for something that's relatively inexpensive or what have you, but that agenda may not line up with the users that are actually going to be using the tool's agenda. So that's also something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I've seen immigration law firms have a rebellion when a senior partner makes a decision on a piece of technology and doesn't run it by the whole team and let them be part of the process, and then finds out that shortly after they have to switch again because I've seen people quit over technology decisions that were made. So I'm sure that's universal across the whole legal profession, but I
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I've seen it happen countless times, both in my industry and at other ones, also at companies I've been a part of. People have either quit or just quietly just not used the new tool because they just felt like they had no ownership in the process. And it's makes what was a problem, you're creating a new problem in addition to the existing problem.
Yeah.
And this sort of falls all into the category of this cultural, being able to actually facilitate these tech changes. A lot of times it's not, the barrier's not, learning the technology or understanding the technology. It might actually just be, can we adopt it? Do we have that firm wide sort of buy-in? How do you know, Colin, and this may be different for a small solo practice versus a larger group versus maybe even in-house counsel, but how do you know, like, if you're evaluating an AI tool, that you are ready to adopt something like that? Maybe you've identified the problem already, but how do you evaluate both yourself and understand if you have, as a team, the buy-in for something like this? And how do you evaluate the tools themselves? How do you speak to vendors to make sure everybody's on the same page?
Yeah, so I think both of those questions actually could likely take up the remainder of the time we have here. So I'll try to keep this relatively quick-ish. So first of all, I think that readiness to start evaluating tools starts with, okay, you've got the problem identified, and you also have the people that are going to be using this potentially new tool into it. In other words, they're buying into, all right, I want, you're making me part of this evaluation process. I want to be a part of it. I'm ready to do this. Let's go. And that you can tell from sort of conversations and from just kind of basically understanding where people are and if they're ready to go and prepared, because they also recognize the problem that has been identified as a problem. So that's number one. Number two, in terms of actually evaluating tools, well, first of all, you want to have, obviously, you do the demo, you have them give you their spiel and all that. But then afterwards, really what you want to do is you want to run through an actual scenario with them that is part and parcel of the problem you're trying to solve for. It could be, I've got all these documents, I want you to review them, or I have this, just whatever that situation is. And there are many forms in which that sort of run through can take. It can be a sort of a try before you buy, like a sandbox type of thing, a proof of concept, seen that many times. It can be perhaps, having the actual team run through a document or whatever with you during a session, because usually what happens is you have this kind of one-sided demo, and then you have another call with other team members and what have you. And then you kind of evaluate it based off of, what it is that what an ideal solution looks like for solving that problem, but not just solely in terms of does it solve the problem, but also does it solve the problem in a way that the team, and you can get a sense through having the users be a part of the process and asking questions, whether they think that this will actually be a solution for them and that they will want to use. So it's very easy for me to say all of that and just outline all of that. It's a lot harder to do that in practice. And the reason is it takes time, it takes alignment of people, it takes people actually wanting to do this work. But if you can get to that point, you'll save yourself a boatload of time and money down the line. So that's why I'm emphasizing it. But I'm not trying to downplay the challenge and the difficulty of it either.
Yeah, it's very, very much a difficult thing. I mean, with any technology, with any sort of even just a change in the office. I mean, you try to implement any sort of rules that might be different than what you did before, and changing habits is very, very difficult. And that is certainly no different with technology, with AI, with whatever it may be. Different processes. You implement a different process, and that can be a painful, growing event. I mean, for you, Greg, I mean, you've seen, I think, a lot of things change over your career. Do you have sort of experiences like this and evaluating tools? And do you have any success stories, any failures? That Colin's sort of talking about in this adoption process. Like, what is that like actually? When you do try and fail or you try and succeed, like what is the sort of payoff there?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what Colin's talking about rings familiar in our organization. So the biggest pain point is usually for an immigration law firm is, and I've learned that it's sort of in immigration law, it's just called case management, and I know in the rest of law it's called practice management or case management. But in the case of immigration, what we're talking about is basically your client data warehouse that generates immigration forms and it helps you create documents and all the rest of it. But it's basically where you're tracking your case deadlines, you're generating immigration forms and all that. That has that tech has been around really for my whole career. I think that when I started in 1990 doing this stuff around then, there were already some products that were at least ancient form filler products that were out there. But for we have changed probably four or five times we've changed vendors in that space, and that is basically the whole culture of a law firm revolves around that technology. And when you get that decision wrong, or when you cheap out and you do something, and you're not looking at sort of like what's the best design for that and what's going to make in life easier for the users, you do have a lot of problems. And this last go around, we actually put together a committee at the firm that was comprised of administrative staff, paralegals, and attorneys that basically were charged, and we gave them a lot of time to evaluate the products and go to events and all that. But that was I think that's and not also basically having the ability to really customize that product around how our firm uses it, and we didn't leave the product we were in for about 8 months after we made the decision to move to a new product, so that we would have plenty of time to really customize it the way we thought it was going to work well. And so far it's doing really well. And I think that's because we learned from bad experiences in the past. But I think that's what Colin was talking about as far as culture, that it did two things. One is it actually works a lot better, that software, now than it would have if we had done it the way we used to, where we just basically flip the switch one day and expect it all to be there. But second, it's also, I think, the fact that we had buy-in from a lot of different areas of the firm from top to bottom, and not just sort of the senior people, has also helped. So that I definitely agree with that. That happens to be a software category as well, where you don't want to have to migrate your data very often to a new product. There's a big learning curve for the clients. There's a big learning curve in the firm, and that's part of it as well. Is like when you adopt this tech, just just have that. It's sort of a nightmare of the thought of having to switch again really quickly to another one, which seems to happen with firms that are not super careful in what they pick. So that's that's how it's played out with us. I mean, there have been the other thing that we have unfortunately we have a broader tech stack than I want, in terms of too many categories of software, that it would be nice if we didn't have all of them. And I'm hopeful that we've talked about trying to consolidate some of the functions that we have into fewer products. But we're also sort of hopeful that some of the AI changes that are coming as far as agentic capabilities might make it just easier for different products to be able to work together more easily than what we see now, so that we don't have many points of truth in the firm, that we have a single source of truth that basically all the products will work together.
That's right. Yeah. And I'm sharing up here on the screen a section from an essay that Colin, you wrote, "The Hype is Not the Tool." And I found this, I think, a pretty good example of sort of what we're talking about here, where you say the gap between we are implementing this technology and we have changed how we actually work is where most legal tech initiatives go to die. Implementation is not adoption. Adoption is not transformation. These are three different things, and conflating them is expensive. The lawyers who navigate this well are not the ones who adopt the fastest. They are not the ones who dismiss everything as hype. They're the ones who ask relentlessly boring, specific questions. And I think that's an excellent sort of
I'm
way
just glad
to.
there are people in my office who ask the relentlessly boring questions, because I'm usually looking at the shiny objects.
And yeah, I mean, so and you provide some examples of these, relentlessly boring questions, Colin, and I think what could go, what you could qualify as the important questions to ask, so that you can allow Greg to sort of do his find his shiny objects and bring them to you, but then you can actually evaluate them well. So you're like, what does this actually do? What does it not do? Who owns the error when it goes wrong? I think these are really, really great questions, especially within the lens of AI adoption. And so for you, Colin, when you speak to people or you speak to, your own organization, or you evaluate this even for yourself, when you're thinking about all the new AI tools that are available, how, what are sort of the relentlessly boring questions that people should be asking about AI specifically?
Yeah, it's a bit of a context-driven kind of situation, but for example, for me, the things I would ask is how much time is this actually helping me get to where I need to be, and how much time am I spending using this tool to get there? Those are two different things. And if I'm spending not a lot of time to get to where I need to be, but it's saving me a fair amount of time, and that's a good thing in many ways. But it's not just about the time. It's also about, okay, is this actually providing me with not just what I'm looking for, but what I need? In other words, is this actually accurate? Is it sort of aligned with what I'm trying to accomplish in a way that I want to accomplish it, and not making me having to redo the work? And so, those are kind of some of the questions, as much as I can generalize them, that I think need to be asked about a lot of these tools. Because there are a lot of tools, and they all seem to claim that they do things really well and can do X or Y with just a few clicks and no whatever needed. But it's the boring questions that will get you there in terms of actually understanding whether this is actually truthful or not, and helpful or not.
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. The last thing I was just going to say was, and I think that, constantly talking or constantly using the word transformation or adoption is not particularly helpful, because, as I mentioned in that document, there are different things, but they're related and they're different, but they're also not all there is to these tools, to using them, to the impacts that you can get from using them.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think, Colin, in one of your articles, it was Responsible AI in Legal Practice, that you wrote several weeks back on there. I mean, you had some of those boring questions in there that I think people need to ask, especially about, legal ethics and how do these tools work as far as complying with confidentiality and how and potential hallucination issues. And I don't know if it was in that article, but I'm sure that as well, about asking hard questions about data security and privacy with the data. Those are not super exciting questions for lawyers to ask, and I'm glad that you wrote about that, because I think that it's usually after people get into trouble with something that they start really paying a lot more attention to it than they do at the beginning stage. So I only wanted to point that out, because I think you hit those issues nicely in that article.
Well, thank you for that, and happy to share it with this audience as well. Because, I mean, I think that what is interesting about, I think asking questions is, the so-called boring questions are only boring in the sense that the information that you're getting by asking that question is perhaps not the most exciting information in the world per se, but exciting and valuable are two different things. And so in terms of value, knowing something about, okay, where's the data being stored? How is it being stored? Is it being used to train the model? How do I comply ethically if I want to use this tool? Those are very valuable things to understand, even though they may not be the most interesting. And it's like, for example, when I took legal ethics in law school, I was not really a huge fan of the class. I didn't find it particularly interesting. It was helpful and valuable information to know for sure, for a variety of reasons. But I wasn't jumping for joy out of that. But that's the point here: is you want to get value out of the tool, and you want to get that, and you want to be able to get that value in a way that allows you to comply with your duties as a lawyer, and as a way that protects, whatever it is you're trying to protect, your data, your client, both. And so, asking boring questions gets you the valuable information that you need to be able to know whether you can achieve that or not in terms of using a tool in a way that's going to have an impact, and a good impact at that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you bring up the data storage, the training usage, but one thing that I think is often not thought about, but really ought to be, and you bring this up as well, and I think it's a great point, because not every software that you get is going to work for you. You might, the demo might work awesome. You might love it when you see it. You might be like, this solves all of our problems, and then when you actually use it, it's not quite what you needed. And so one of the things you talk about that's just as important with data storage and understanding, the way that data is used with AI tools is also what happens when the relationship ends. How, what are your sort of, what should people know about that, especially people who are sort of just getting started with these tools? What do they need to know about, what maybe a termination of a relationship is, and what that means with AI tools?
Yeah, well, I think first of all that what you speak to points to why I think a proof of concept or a sandbox or something can be helpful. But that being said, that may still work out well, and at some point you may indeed need to terminate for whatever reason. So I think on that point, and I as a vendor don't always love this, but we always get asked for it, and I do think it's important to ask if you're a buyer, is termination options, termination for convenience, what are the costs, what, not just in terms of fees or whatever, but also getting our data out. Where is it going? How is it transferred? Are we going to have support for that? How do we get our data out of it? How long do you keep our data for? And that's a conversation that, the company I work for, we constantly have. I've had conversations with others as well about that more generally, because it is very important for companies to understand and know that whatever data they give to the vendor or have stored in a vendor's system, they want to be sure that that data is data they can get out, but also get out in a way that is workable for both parties. And also, frankly, I would think as a buyer, I would not want the vendor to have this data be stored, by them forever. Although you'd be surprised how long some companies seem to just let companies store their data for, which should scare some of these companies' DPOs, I think. But that being said, yeah, there needs to be a mutual framework for ending the relationship, which is why I think lawyers, including myself, spend a fair amount of time negotiating provisions around termination and around extraction of data and other things relating to those 2 points, because you want to have a clean exit when that happens, because you don't want there to be an exit, but let's be honest, an exit sometimes has to happen for whatever reason. And so you want to be sure that you've got a game plan for that, and you're not doing things, by the seat of your pants when it happens.
Yeah, these are excellent points. And did you have a point there, Greg? I saw you sort of.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, and it's not just the AI companies. This has been a problem for a while, but I know, for immigration lawyers that are watching, that has been I'm not going to name companies, but it has been a huge problem where companies are switching vendors for their client management or their case management data, and where essentially some companies have been accused of holding data hostage, where they need to be able to move that into a new system, and they are being asked to pay really exorbitant fees that are basically the equivalent of an annual salary of some of your employees, to be able to get that data out. So Colin, you're absolutely I think on the nose as far as really having a good understanding on the front end of what it means when you decide that it's time to move on from a company, and how does that work? What does it cost? How long does it take? All those things are, whatever tech you're buying, and even it doesn't have to be sort of the latest, the latest new tech, but that's something that I've seen firms actually go to court over, in the immigration space, because of that issue. So I would pay a lot of attention.
Yeah, I mean, bottom line is, at least from my view, whenever you have an agreement between two parties, you want there to be a sufficient level of detail there so that when a foreseeable scenario like a termination happens, you have a plan for what that is going to look like. Because otherwise, what is likely to happen, unfortunately, Greg, to your point, is litigation, which, at least in my world, no transactional lawyer wants that at all, for sure. I don't think anyone really wants that anyway. But that happens because it's for lack of clarity, and then you're arguing over, well, what does this mean? What does that mean? And that again points to the fact, well, you didn't really have a plan for this, so now you're battling that plan out in court.
Yeah, I would only say for vendors out there that are taking a really restrictive view on that there's a marketing opportunity to bring people in on the front end when you can, when you're able to tell them, how easy it will be for you to leave their product. In the end, makes people a lot more comfortable making the decision to go with you in the first place versus what they hear through the ether from other law firms about the nightmare that they had trying to get their data when they switched from you. So I just don't think it's good business, even for the vendors that are with those policies either. But it seems like they'll do, they take those tack, I guess, defensively. But I don't think it's good marketing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think it's good marketing. I think it's not great for the relationship overall, and certainly I think that unfortunately, I think some companies do take a very defensive position around it for whatever reason, because they figure in most cases they're going to be able to get away with it. But the problem is those cases where they're not going to get away with it.
Yeah. Well, they can't see the clients that they didn't get because of that policy.
Exactly.
The ones that they were able to force to pay.
Yeah.
Those are all fantastic points. And, I think I'm interested now, Colin, I would love to know, and this is something, I've talked to Greg about, I've talked with our friend Ruby Powers as well, who does some teaching. What are you seeing with this next generation of lawyers who are coming in, and are they, do you find that they are more prepared, having been, this is a generation of lawyers that have probably grown up with the internet their entire lives? Are they more prepared for tech adoption? Is this where they can really change the sort of next generation of lawyering? Is this what you're seeing in the classroom, or what has your experience been like with this younger
Are
generation?
you worried or optimistic?
So, I think I likely would have, had a different answer if I wasn't teaching. at a law school that also happens to have students of a range of backgrounds, ages, and levels of professional experience. And what I have generally found is that as much as there is written and talked about this sort of alleged perceived generational divide between older lawyers and younger lawyers about adoption of tech and willingness to adapt and change, it's not as clear cut. You have some younger folks that are tech savvy, all about it, really eager. And then you have some that frankly are ambivalent. It's not that they're against it, they're just not for it either. They view it as perhaps necessary, but they don't view it as sort of this imperative that a lot of folks, I think, especially in legal tech, see it as being. Whereas you also have some older lawyers that, for whatever reason, are all about it and really kind of keen on moving forward with it and really advocating for it. And some of the younger lawyers are the ones who actually are pushing back more. So I do think that this actually is an area that isn't necessarily talked about enough, because too often it's overly generalized as, oh, it's just older versus younger, when that's not really what's going on here. And as much as younger generations have been exposed to tech and kind of just live and breathe it, just because they live and breathe it doesn't mean that they necessarily are seeing that sort of translate into their professional lives, meaning that they're as keen on it being a part of their professional life as they are keen on having it be a part of their personal life.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, that's I think that's reassuring, and I've seen that certainly play out. Greg, you're one of the
The old
hard,
guys.
yeah, one of the old guys who's
You're talking
for
about?
Adoption. That's right. That's
I
was
do.
looking for a nicer way to put that.
I am worried, and I know that, Colin, you've written about judgment and how to basically lawyers that are coming into the field, particularly with some of the AI tools that are out there, and being in a founder of an AI company, you would think that I would be dismissive of some of those concerns, but I am concerned that I really do think that lawyers moving in to the space need to be masters of the subject matter and be trained by their senior lawyers in exercising judgment in how they handle things. And I'm concerned that I'm not as concerned about small firms, which I think a lot of bigger law firms are sort of taking this view that they can invest heavily in these tools and hire a lot fewer younger associates. And that's fine for now, but in a generation when these, it's going to be a problem when you have the senior lawyers in these firms that don't actually have the kind of experience that they would have had based on traditional training. So, Colin, I know you've written about that subject, about what's about judgment and basically what what lawyers need to be thinking about in firms, as they bring on younger lawyers. But I'm curious as far as whether you feel like that message is getting through to the profession, or it's something that's going to become a much more serious problem as time goes on.
I would answer that question this way. I think that it is being increasingly taken seriously, but just because it's being taken seriously in a larger way doesn't necessarily translate into it being something just people automatically think about when they're using these tools. I think that there still remains a bit of a gap between people's excitement and interest in these tools and the expectations. And some of it, I think, comes from the fact that most of the AI tools that exist, at least those that you kind of chat with, interact with, are designed to be people pleasing, meaning they're going to give you what you want, just may not be what you need. And so, that's where the judgment comes in. And I think a little bit of expectations come into play as well, because people hear the phrase artificial intelligence and they think, oh, intelligence, meaning really smart, like me, when that's not really what's happening here. It's just intelligent in a way that it is matching up patterns in sophisticated ways. That's all it's doing. It's not actually thinking in a way that you and I think about or conceptualize thinking of. And the fact that it's giving you information that is seemingly accurate but may not necessarily be so isn't the tool being problematic or purposely trying to, be detrimental. It's just an inherent part of how these tools work. And so there, I think, does need to be more attention paid to that. And as for judgment itself, as I said before, I do think that there is more attention being paid and there is more consideration of the fact that people need to think through what it is that they're doing and what information they're getting from these tools. But there also sometimes is a tendency to get a little lax when you start using a tool more and more and kind of like, okay, I think I know what I'm doing here. I think I'm good. And you can't really rest on your laurels. You always have to be aware and act with intention with these tools.
And I think that's excellent advice, and I appreciate you sharing that, Colin. There's so many other things that I wish we could dive into with you, because you do have such a great list of articles that you've put out, and you can find those on your LinkedIn. You can find them on your website as well. I would like, you spend all your time in tech. We spend a lot of our time in tech as well, Colin, but I'd love to know, what are you doing these days that's, helping you become a better thinker, or just improving your lifestyle? What are those good habits you have that sort of fall outside of tech that keep you going? I know Greg, big bike rider, fantastic traveler. I guess you can also qualify, maybe your speaking, Greg, is one of those good habits, so you can get out there as well. What are you doing, Colin? Do you have some hobbies like that, like bike riding? Maybe you do Sudoku. Who knows what it is? What's keeping you sharp these days?
Yeah. Well, you can't really see it, but I do have a gaming computer next to me that is solely for video gaming. Because I use a Mac, and Macs are horrible with video games. So I have a PC that I use for video gaming. So that is a way for me to unwind. The two cats that we have definitely keep me on my toes. Both being 14, they're, I guess,
litter mates.
They're older, but nevertheless, definitely have taught me a lot about patience and tolerating things.
I have a cat too, so I'm on your side
in a lot of ways. And fur is just a part of life. I also like to travel. So that for me is a big thing that helps me unwind, just a change in pace. As I've gotten older, I've gotten more into just experiences, just kind of enjoying experiences, and just doing things, being out here in sort of more mountainous region of the Northeast. I love the mountains, so being out there makes me happy. So like Colorado is probably one of my favorite places to go visit, because there's all this hiking and actually some good biking, although a little more on the dangerous end, one could argue, because it's mountain biking. It's just me being out in nature probably is the number one thing that helps me just calm down and slow down a little bit, which actually is a good reminder of me to probably do more of it.
We don't have very many mountains here.
No, very, very flat here in Memphis.
We're like the flattest part of America.
That's right. That's right. Well, all of those sound like fantastic things, and probably a few things. It's so easy to sit inside and do all the things on our computers these days. Now that, AI is. I find myself, when I use AI, that it can do so many remarkable things that it's like I find it almost as its own. It's almost like its own video game. It's sort of changed how I work on my computer. But absolutely, best way to stay sharp: get outside, do some hiking, get some exercise. All those fantastic things.
Design good hikes and good bike tours, so you can kind of get the best of. You can get the best of both.
Yeah. Absolutely. The only thing you kind of have to watch out for, really, in terms of those tours, is just the weather, which can change very rapidly, and don't want to be at the top of a mountain during a thunderstorm, which I've been before, which was interesting.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again so much, Colin, for taking the time to join us today to talk.
Sweet, Colin.
We would certainly love to have you back again sometime soon because there's plenty more to talk about in this space. If you're interested, you can join the ILTC email list. For anybody who's watching, you can scan that QR code up right by my head. Colin, for anybody who's looking to learn a little bit more about what you've written about and where to find you, where can they do that?
Well, as you mentioned at the outset, LinkedIn is probably the #1 place to find me under my name, as well as my website, colinsLevy.com. That's COLINSLEVY.
I was going to ask you whether you like Levy or Levy on there.
My parents.
I'm a Levy, so I can. We're anciently related.
Well, my parents taught me Levy, so I just go with that.
All right.
Well, there we go. So we've settled a naming debate there as well. So we can add that to our list of accomplishments for today. Again, thank you so much, Colin. We appreciate it. Greg, thank you for your time as well, and thank you for everybody who has stopped by to listen in. And we hope to see you again in another couple of weeks. And outside of that, that is pretty much everything we've got for today. Anything last parting words, Greg or Colin?
Nope.
Pleasure to be here with you, Ian and Greg. Really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
See
you
you
both.
next time.
Thanks.